Unfortunately, despite my best efforts, I've never managed to become the T-800 Terminator with an Austrian accent I've always wanted to be. Nevertheless, I will try to help you to live through the invaluable content in this card for anyone who wants to survive and is an earthbound mortal. This is based on decades of living through survival situations, doing survival research, and also some of the best authors like Lawrence Gonzalez on the subject of survival. This is a quote from Deep Survival, Lawrence Gonzalez. By its very nature, a survival situation, like life itself, comes upon you unexpectedly. So only if life is lived in its entirety as an act of survival can you have a hope of finding correct action at the moment of crisis. Survival is a path that must be walked from birth to death. This is a quote from Al Siebert in The Survivor Personality. The survivor does not impose pre-existing patterns on new information, but rather allows new information to reshape his mental models. The person who has the best chance of handling a situation well is usually the one with the best mental pictures or images of what is occurring outside of the body. And here's a couple more excerpts from Deep Survival. Stress was eroding his ability to perceive. He saw less, heard less, began to miss important cues from his environment. Few of us believe in our own mortality until we're face to face with it, and then some of us will forget immediately after. More quotes from Deep Survival. Okay. So when you get this card, it may or may not seem relevant to the card position or what's happening in your life right now. This card may come up when you're not in a survival situation because the most opportune time to learn survival skills is before they're needed. This is probably the longest of all Zap Oracle cards, at least it is so far. But it is also a concise survival manual for anyone who is an earthbound mortal. Sometimes it will focus on life or death situations, but it also teaches lifelong, everyday skills. If you're in a survival situation presently, it's probably of the slow-moving sort, or you wouldn't be doing an oracle reading. If that's the case, the emphasis here is on the stance of the survivor and warrior. So if you're in a slow-moving survival situation right now, focus on basics, discipline, attention to detail, and working with and through privations and difficulties. Try to minimize self-pity as you do the best you can from awakening to bedtime, working with what the day presents you. Maintain a positive mental attitude, especially if circumstances are grim, and if other people are involved, raise group morale. This is a warrior moving forward with purpose stance. It has nothing to do with being a Pollyanna, putting your head in the sand, or stamping a smiley face on a grim situation. It's a stance consciously chosen in difficult circumstances because it greatly improves survival odds. Twice, when I was a wilderness guide, I led a group that was physically fit young guys but who were demoralized by harsh conditions. They began to panic and got caught in a groupthink consensus on a course of action that was highly dangerous because they mistakenly thought it would lead to a quicker escape from the harsh situation. I had to assertively impose a positive attitude in the group and insist on a painfully difficult but necessary course of action. Physically fit people with the best equipment and training often make fatal mistakes in survival situations, while people with none of those things but street smarts, common sense, and determination survive. Late at night on a Denver street, I was with a friend who was a bodybuilder and powerlifter who was the strongest man in his weight class in Colorado. He was also a Brazilian jiu-jitsu coach. but he was not street smart, at least not that night. And all his other abilities tempted him toward making a choice that almost got both of us shot. I was half a block away when the situation developed and had no idea what he had gotten himself into till he called out to me for help. In an active shooter situation, the drill is run, hide, fight. Those actions are in a crucial order. Notice that fight is the last resort, not the first. The old proverb is that if your only tool is a hammer, you'll think everything is a nail. What was all that muscle and martial arts training for? Thought my friend. He chose the last resort first in a situation he could have walked away from. He had many more mental maps related to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and not as many about street situations. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, bringing someone to the ground and getting them in a headlock might be a winning strategy. Trying that on a street created a catastrophic situation that came close to getting both of us shot. Years later, I happened to see a show where a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy would go to various other martial arts schools to learn from their styles. In the episode I saw, he was going to a Krav Maga training camp in Israel. It set up something of a culture clash. Like most martial arts styles, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is designed to win contests, while Krav Maga is designed to survive real-world, hand-to-hand combat. Given a chance to spar, the star of the show managed to bring a fellow trainee down to the mat, a likely contest-winning development for a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy. But this enraged the female Israeli trainer. In heavily accented English, don't have much of an Israeli accent, unfortunately, but I'll try my best, she screamed at him, "Why you go on the ground? You go on the ground, you die!" He went on the ground because he brought mental models from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, not real-world models like run, hide, fight. Based on my total lack of martial arts training, but having grown up in the Bronx during its most dangerous era, and then working for 6 years as the building security coordinator of Samuel Gompers, an all-male public high school in the South Bronx during the crack epidemic, I'd rephrase what the Krav Maga trainer said this way. Why are you letting things devolve into hand-to-hand combat? You fight with no weapon, you die. And of course, if you can walk away from the fight and achieve safety that way, don't fight at all. The reason should be obvious. Why not to get into hand-to-hand combat, in other words? A street situation is not a gentleman's bar fight. If you're attacked, the assailants almost always have a huge physical advantage. They're 5 and you're 1. They've got a 9mm and you don't. One day, when I was working at that high school in the South Bronx, martial arts legend Chuck Norris, at the height of his movie stardom, came to give an assembly talk. At first, the kids were excited, but as his talk droned on, they became increasingly restless and pissed. They thought he was going to show his stuff. Instead, they were getting what they considered a jive-ass talk from a rich white celebrity on doing their homework, not doing drugs, and staying in school. When Norris was finally done with what actually was a jive-ass talk that was not landing at all, there was time for some Q&A. A kid who was clearly pissed off by the whole experience came up to the mic for the first question. "Yo, what you gonna do if the other guy got a gun?" Exactly. You're going to be a corpse full of 9mm holes and a lot of expensive martial arts lessons gone to waste. The friend who almost got us killed was frequently getting significant injuries in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training sessions and contests, and yet he persisted in claiming he was learning survival skills. I pointed out to him that his Jiu-Jitsu training was far more of a threat to his physical health than anything likely to happen to him living in Boulder, Colorado. In a survival situation, I'll take a skinny, crafty, streetwise person over an Olympic athlete with martial arts training and the best equipment, but who isn't street smart. Run, hide, fight. And if you do have to fight, don't resort to hand unless you're on a movie set. There has to be something in the environment you can use as a weapon. Even if you are naked in a desert, you could still throw sand in an assailant's face. An inventive approach to using the materials at hand is a hallmark of survivor thinking, says Lawrence Gonzalez in Deep Survival. There are too many survival skills to cover in one card, so follow the links to learn more. And if you want to live, read the work of Lawrence Gonzalez and Gavin de Becker. Gonzalez is the giant in the field of survival research, and de Becker is the giant in the field of personal security and how to avoid being a victim of violence. Links to their work follow. Survival situations require you to recognize a dynamic paradox, a need for energy conservation and sudden bursts of energy. There's a saying, I didn't quite say that right, so the paradox is because sometimes you need to be slowing down a bit to conserve energy, and other times you need sudden bursts of every ounce of energy you can possibly summon. There's a saying that war is 99% boredom and 1% sheer terror. During the boring part, conserve energy. During the terrifying chaotic part, you need to stay calm and act with lightning speed and force when required. As Gonzalez puts it, a survival situation is a ticking clock. You have only so much stored energy and water, and every time you exert yourself, you're using it up. The trick is to become extremely stingy with your scarce resources, like your body moisture, balancing risk and reward, investing only in efforts that offer the biggest return. During the boring part, don't neglect the need for rest. If you're sweating, you're probably working too hard and need to conserve energy and body moisture. Gonzalez points out that children under 6 years old have one of the highest survival rates of any group, even though they're tiny and lose body heat much faster than adults. But in the same survival situation, they often do better than experienced hunters, physically fit backpackers, skilled sailors, and ex-military. They allow the evolutionary wisdom of instinct to guide them. If they're thirsty, they'll drink from a puddle. If they're tired, they'll curl up in a ball and go to sleep. The group that performs the worst, or one of the groups that performs the worst, are children ages 7 to 12. They're more mental, but their minds still lack skill and experience. On the other side of the dynamic paradox, you have the red-hot chaotic emergency that's like a knife fight in a telephone booth, as one fighter pilot put it. Your IQ can roll back to that of an ape in a fraction of a second. You need two things: not to freeze, choke, or panic, but to stay calm, and also, as Gonzalez puts it, the fight for survival requires a burst of energy. You have to become like a weasel, moving fast and getting the job done. Biologists say nature rewards energy and aggression. Navy SEALs use the phrase violence of action and define it this way. Violence of action means the unrestricted use of speed, strength, surprise, and aggression to achieve total dominance against your enemy. It's a principle of combat, but to adapt it to general survival situations, we could change the wording this way. Decisive action means the use of speed, strength, surprise, and aggression to regain control of a dangerous situation. Stay calm and act decisively. As Muhammad Ali put it, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. We live in an age of distraction where people lose situational awareness to their phones. Victims are like sleepwalkers projecting sloppy mental models based on the past. Survivors are humble, wary, open, and alert. They catch off details in their environment. A victim looks up and thinks, "Oh, there's John, I see him every day," and looks down. A survivor looks up and thinks, "Oh, there's John, I see him every day, but wait, something's different today. Something's up." Today's the day when unassuming John becomes a rampage shooter. The survivor picked up on off details and chose not to ignore what de Becker calls pre-incident indicators. His research shows that de Becker's research, in other words, shows that most victims of violence receive pre-incident indicators that they ignore. Something that drives me crazy is when people have led sheltered lives, not that I'm not living a sheltered life right now, I am, trivialize the words survivor and survival to talk about stuff that is not a survival situation. As Christopher Lasch pointed out in The Culture of Narcissism, survival and survivor are words often abused by narcissists to glamorize difficulties that don't threaten survival. For example, Burning Man and other festivals and events, even indoor conventions I go to, often give you a survival manual for the event. I mock this narcissistic inflation of keeping your shit together at a festival into a survival situation in my Burning Man travelogue and critique. Highly recommend it. It's one of my more entertaining pieces of writing. You can watch it on this YouTube channel or read it on the site. It's called Incendiary Person in the Desert Carnival Realm, and it's about my first Burning Man experience. Might have been 2008. Some of the older burners in my crew gave me some more warnings about the conditions I would face out on the playa, making it sound like wicked dust storms would scour the flesh right off my bones. If I didn't constantly drink water, I would turn into some kind of desiccated mummy-like husk that would get blown across the desert like a tumbleweed. I had trouble taking their warnings too seriously because I knew that most of them were out of shape and would never have survived past burns if the conditions were really so challenging. Back in the day, I'd been a wilderness guide and had led backpacking trips into remote desert canyons where there were no trails, let alone thousands of RVs. I was again told about the philosophy of radical self-reliance, a phrase pounded into my head from every Burning Man webpage. For example, the preparation page is emblazoned with radical self-reliance. Your survival depends on your reading and following these lists. But Eric, I intoned with tastefully muted sarcasm, didn't you say that he was giving me this intense water drill? As if, I was like a water fat off-worlder, like being initiated by a Fremen about going out into the deep desert. But Eric, I intoned with tastefully muted sarcasm, didn't you say that I can buy all the bags of ice I want there? Yes, they will have several ice distribution centers. Okay, because based on my wilderness training, Eric, in the hot desert, and by a fairly easy-to-master low-tech process, ice can be easily converted into water. Anyway, as I walked through the 18-aisle fluorescent-lit cornucopia of the Winnemucca supermarket, one of the town's closest to Burning Man, that was just to get supplies before entering Burning Man, I thought about this philosophy of radical self-reliance and realized that in the coming week, the only thing that would stand between me and the empty desert would be the trail mix I had brought from Boulder and the large plastic jugs of supermarket water I was piling into my cart. At least that's all that would stand between me and the desert besides Center Camp, where they sell coffee, chai, lemonade, and ice. They've since stopped doing that at Center Camp, but at the time they had that. And the 15,000 or 20,000 RVs filled with people offering free foods and drink. If this was radical self-reliance, what would just regular self-reliance look like? Living off the land in a Las Vegas casino with only a wallet full of gold credit cards to stand between you and the elements? Unfortunately, that's the end of the excerpt, by the way. I was part of the staff of a small festival when a 19-year-old kid OD'd in his tent. When it comes to Burning Man last year, 2023, we got hit by flooding that turned the playa into sticky, wet cement. This made national news as if it was like an epic disaster. There was one fatality, but it had nothing to do with the weather. It was another OD. Get 80,000 people, many of them intoxicated, together for a week, and it should surprise no one that there will be an occasional fatality. Have 80,000 people stay home for a week, and statistically there's an excellent chance that one of them will die of a heart attack or have a fall in the bathroom that splits open their head. The hard surfaces of a slippery bathroom are far more likely to kill you than brain-eating zombies, by the way. Growing up in the most dangerous era of the Bronx, surrounded by Holocaust survivors and a dad who survived D-Day when no one else in his corps did, and having been in a number of life or death situations myself, I've developed a survivor mentality that doesn't always seem warranted. When I was young, I thought a second Holocaust and having to survive in the wilderness was not a matter of if, but when. I taught myself wilderness survival skills, spending 3 weeks in the snow without a tent on my first solo camping trip. This was after just having read about wilderness survival in books. Decades later, the only wilderness survival situations I've been in were because I chose to be a wilderness guide. Even now, living in Boulder, the most un-Bronx-like place I can find, at least in this country, I still walk around with a camera bag containing pepper spray, a Swiss Army knife, a compact flashlight that could blind an attacker, etc., as though at any moment I might have to parachute behind enemy lines. Meanwhile, my neighborhood presents about the same mortal danger as Disney World. But any mortal situation, even Boulder or Disney World, can turn into a survival situation. The most dangerous thing that happened to me in the Bronx was getting severely mauled by a German Shepherd when I was 11, something that could have happened anywhere. That was also when I first discovered that a survival situation can sometimes kick you into a nearly paranormal level of high functioning. That's not uncommon, according to Gonzalez. 35% of the population have that capacity. And by the way, if you want to hear about the strange paranormal circumstances of that dog mauling, it's in a document on the website called A Mutant Convergence, how John Major Jenkins, Terence McKenna, and Jonathan Zapp met during a weekend of high strangeness in 1996. The need for your survival abilities and training could arrive one heartbeat from now. Even in Boulder or Disney World, you could find yourself in a life or death situation. For example, at my favorite Boulder supermarket, King Soopers, about an hour before I was scheduled to go there for a flu shot, a maniac killed 10 people. I guess that's an example that vaccines, just like any other pharmaceutical, can kill you, but so can viruses. So just play the odds as best you can. And at the Seven Seas Lagoon in Disney World, an alligator killed a 2-year-old. Statistically, you are far more likely to be killed by your diet or your slippery bathroom than by either a supermarket shooter or an alligator. And the safest places on Earth have slippery bathrooms. And by the way, this is something that I've always observed out of mom who taught statistics and probability, and I took a course on that at the Bronx High School of Science, and somehow I can have trouble understanding people who cannot think statistically even on the most basic level. Like when I was in the Bronx in 1977 working in the South Bronx, actually next door to where the famous serial killer David Berkowitz was working, these various young women I knew were telling me, I can't go out tonight because David Berkowitz is out there. Okay, slight possibility he was killing young couples, basically. But there were 2,000 murders a year in New York anyway. So that David Berkowitz was still around was a relatively small hazard compared to the general hazard of just being in the city no matter what in that era, because it was kind of like the Wild West at the time. As someone pointed out, there are no survivors on this earth. Eventually something gets all of us, so it's not about surviving. It's more about thriving while you can and avoiding death when it would be inconvenient or happen in an unnecessarily messy and painful way. I'm not here to try and hang on to this one meat body with a white-knuckled grip until I can squeeze out every last possible second of incarnation. I'm psyched that I will eventually get to cross the event horizon into another dimension. See my book, Crossing the Event Horizon, put that on a rational basis. I just want to get my work, like the Oracle revision I'm doing here in 2024, done first. So my goal is not to do stupid shit that might cause unnecessary death or disability, while it would be inconvenient for me to die. So, if you share the goal of that sort of survival, I have a few more practical suggestions. Relax your vigilance about zombies unless the National Warning System sends you an alert that they're closing in on your neighborhood, and instead pay more attention to your diet. Few things are as likely to wreck the quality and quantity of your life as poor nutrition. Industrial food scientists are well aware that a fat, sugar, salt combo is as addictive as cocaine and use that trio to enslave people to toxic food-like substances. Though much of the research on human nutrition is highly flawed and unreliable, there is no controversy about SAD, the acronym for Standard American Diet, which is now the standard in much of the world, being highly toxic. As Michael Pollan says, eat food, mostly plants, not too much. Eat food, not what Pollan calls food-like substances, which are many steps removed from any plant or animal derivative and have long ingredient lists. In other words, almost everything in the middle of the supermarket. Avoid foods that make health claims. They're usually highly contrived food-like substances with long ingredient lists, and so you'll see a image there of an ad for Pop-Tarts or the Pop-Tarts package that says Pop-Tarts are a good source of 8 vitamins and minerals. Right, they ground up a few chemical vitamins into this toxic food product. How anybody falls from that, I have no idea. Avoid anything that says low fat. That means they took the healthier calories out and replaced them with sugar or high fructose corn syrup. Be wary of any food products that use the word natural on the packaging. All that means is that they're not organic and probably have chemical pesticide residue. And avoid anything that has natural flavors in the ingredient list. Natural flavors. Is that an extract of the natural flavor plant? Notice that natural flavors doesn't specify any ingredient. So what exactly is it? Simple. According to the FDA, the term natural flavor or natural flavoring means the essential oil, oleoresin, essence, or extractative, protein hydrosylate, distillate, or any product of roasting, heating, or enzymolysis, which contains the flavoring, like what grandma does, obviously, which contains the flavoring constituents derived from a spice, fruit, or fruit juice, vegetable or vegetable juice, edible yeast, herb, bark, bud, root, leaf, or similar plant material, meat, seafood, poultry, eggs, dairy products, or fermentation products thereof, whose significant function in food is flavoring rather than nutritional. In other words, a toxic word salad of legalese and food technology jargon, creating a definition expansive enough that tanker cars filled with factory-fresh natural flavors pass through it every day. Although much nutritional research is of very poor quality, the basics are not in dispute. But there is also no such thing as the one perfect diet for all people. People tend toward ideological dietary paradigms and double down on those with religious intensity, but the evidence is that people can thrive on highly divergent diets. See the book Diet Cults. Unlike nutritional research, the research showing that exercise has more effect on the quality and quantity of life than anything except meaningfulness and social connection is incontrovertible. Being sedentary is a death trip, increasing your risk of every kind of bad medical outcome. Read the book Exercised. I also recommend the book Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia. To increase, he impressed me because he talks about wellness, WellSpan instead of health span or something instead of lifespan, and he consciously does not use the term anti-aging, which is a red flag, because Our bodies, like those of other animals, are pro-aging. So unless and until we, find out how to manipulate our DNA, which is entirely possible, and prevent aging, it's a deceptive marketing term, anti-aging. To increase your quantity and quality of life, do not become a true believer or absolutist for or against pharmaceuticals, including vaccines. Evaluate these carefully on a case-by-case basis. Pharmaceuticals can destroy your life quality or kill you outright. And vaccines are pharmaceutical, in case you didn't realize. But they can also save your life and life quality in other cases. For example, if you have cholesterol or blood pressure issues, there are relatively safe medications where the benefits likely outweigh the risks. But if you take whatever the doctor prescribes without questioning it, you're being stupid. If you are against all pharma and vaccines in all circumstances, you're being really, really stupid. Antibiotics are horribly misused, but before them, the average life expectancy was 47. Having said that, a study indicated that medical errors may now be the third leading cause of death. And I'm going to get into that medical error thing more in a minute, but I just want to say this thing that people will often say, well, I don't take pharmaceuticals of any kind because they're not natural. So anytime we're using the word natural or nature, we're always in the presence of sloppy thinking. Nothing is outside of nature, okay? And nature, people who use that word, like they think like nature is like this kindly, like Vermont grandmother who like just wants to like make you a cup of chamomile tea with honey and heal you and stuff naturally. Okay, nature is also like black widow spiders and praying mantises, who bite the head off their mate, at the moment of orgasm, and then, at least the praying mantis eat them afterwards. Nature is also gamma bursters, as natural as like a bowl of oatmeal. And a gamma burster could sterilize a large part of an entire galaxy. That's when a sun that could be 100 times the mass of our sun turns into a giant hydrogen bomb. That's natural. Okay, polio vaccine is artificial, but the virus that can paralyze you for life or kill you, the vaccine is not artificial, but the virus is perfectly natural. This is why everyone who is cognitively competent, the medical error issue, which kills a lot of people, may be the third leading cause of death in this country. So everyone who's cognitively competent needs to be their own medical advocate. I witnessed my mom at 90 years old, while hospitalized for fever that was bad enough to cause brain damage and give her 2 weeks' worth of amnesia, save her own life from a potentially fatal medical error. She grabbed her chart from the foot of the bed, flipped through it, and discovered that she was scheduled to get a dose of warfarin, a blood-thinning medication, 10 times higher than she had ever been given before. She raised hell until they corrected the error. And this was at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan, top-notch teaching hospital. Then, adding insult to injury, just because she was so assertive about correcting the mistake, they said she was agitated. Why shouldn't she be? They almost killed her, and sent in a young psychiatric intern to give her a psych evaluation. This further irritated my mother, since she was a psychologist with 44 years of clinical experience and understood tests and how to administer them much better than this intern, who resisted my mom's assertion that the test was totally unnecessary. Okay, let's get it over with, my mom said finally with exasperation. She correctly answered the questions rapid fire, often snapping out the correct answer before the intern had even finished the question. When the test concluded, my mom said, "Now let me tell you the 10 procedural errors you made while administering this test. First, you had no baseline," and so on and so forth. More often, my mom was a superb diplomat when dealing with doctors and anyone outside the family. She was constantly writing letters of praise and appreciation to anyone who helped her with anything. I learned from my parents to very assertively fight City Hall. That's an expression millennials and Gen Z probably don't know, but it just means fighting bureaucracies, which could be a technology company that sent you a defective gadget and is refusing to replace it, for example. And also to write testimonials, reviews, and appreciation for anyone who does help out. So I do that all the time. If you want to survive, you need to be a skillful politician. Doesn't mean you're manipulative. It just means that you are socially intelligent. A National Geographic article on chimpanzees began with the sentence, "Every chimpanzee is a politician." When it comes to your health, consider yourself your own medical advocate and manager. While all doctors and medical professionals are valuable subcontractors working for you, unless you are fabulously rich and powerful and have your own medical team, your doctor has only a short time to focus on you before the next patient, while you have the chance to observe your health every waking minute of every day. I plan for those precious minutes with a doctor and have a written list of pertinent questions. I've researched the issues and advocate for particular lab tests, pharmaceuticals, and devices that I feel are necessary. This is especially important when there's a better medication, lab test, procedure, or device that would be beneficial, but which exceeds that minimal and cost-saving standard of care. When talking to doctors, I turn on all the charm I can find, but I'm also concise because I know the clock is running. I get them to quickly shift from talking to me as an ignorant patient to talking to me more like a colleague because I come prepared and well-informed, and my questions and requests reflect that preparation. Study your lab test results carefully and observe any trends compared to earlier tests. So if you're fortunate to have an HMO of any kind, there's almost always a web portal where you can see past results and they'll graph them out for you and stuff like that. Look for any values that are at the edges of the green zone, what's considered normal or acceptable, which is often a range that's been widened to avoid alarm, but allows that which is problematic, though not catastrophic, to be considered normal. Almost any doctor's visit can be a survival situation where decisions are made that can save your life or end your life. I plan on writing up some of what I've learned about fighting City Hall, dealing with bureaucracies in general in the future. Might even make it an oracle card, we'll see. But if I do, I will add a link to whatever I write to this card, so look for that in the future. I used to be a wilderness guide, mountain climber, and marathon runner, and a few other things, cyclist, and so on, but I was fortunate to avoid life-changing injuries. I've mostly avoided sports and adventures where the risks were excessive, excepting some, mountain climbing adventures and desert canyon experiences and so forth from the past. Contact sports with high rates of concussion and other injuries reduce life quality and quantity. However, for some, high-risk activities are so valuable the sacrifice may be worth it. But I would put a tremendous burden of proof on that, especially if you're a young male. Young males consistently discount risks and do things at the cost of their future selves. Many species of animals are found in the La Brea tar pits, but male adolescents of whatever species are the most common demographic. When you're young, and especially male, you feel immortal and invulnerable, and I felt that way at the time too. In the classic Jack London story, To Build a Fire, a physically strong and experienced but cocky young man ignores the advice of the village elders and ventures into the tundra alone and pays with his life. So his advice was never go out there by yourself. Now, he had plenty of experience of the tundra and dealing with extremely cold weather, and he was very physically strong. However, he had the hubris of not following the elders' advice. So when you ignore well-established survival principles, unless the situation justifies sacrificing yourself, you're being stupid. So here's one of those things to pay attention to. Most hypothermia deaths occur in moderate temperature, usually like in the 50s, because people go on hikes wearing cotton, especially denim, which wilderness search and rescue people call death cloth, because if you get caught in the rain, those denim pants are going to get super wet and heavy. They will not dry off, and they can kill you by sucking all the heat out of your body. I used to teach youth at risk at an alternative school in New York. Among other subjects, I taught an urban survival course because statistically, what's most likely to kill teenagers is their tendency to do stupid shit, which I pointed out to them, of course. But we also worked on how to survive situations they might get into because of doing stupid shit, just in case of the unlikely event that a teenager might ignore the cautionary advice of their teacher. I set up urban survival scenarios and would then have them split up into small groups and game out how to survive them. The goal was for the students to teach themselves that common sense and adaptability can keep you alive. For example, in one scenario I invented, a young guy decides to break into a junkyard at night to steal a part he needs to fix his rusty muscle car. Climbing over the tall chain-link fence surrounding the junkyard, he slips and breaks his leg in the fall. Foolishly, he went on his nocturnal adventure wearing only a light jacket, and the temperature is dropping toward freezing. There won't be anyone at the junkyard who could help for another 14 hours. This was before the era of kids having cell phones. What should he do to survive? I'd let the class brainstorm solutions until they arrived at one that could work, like crawling toward old newspapers or other insulating material, or using a piece of broken glass or sharp metal to tear insulation off car seats. The next step would be to crawl into a relatively intact vehicle, bringing the insulation with you, and then covering yourself with it. Do some research on survival. I highly recommend books by Lawrence Gonzalez, especially Deep Survival, the classic. To state the obvious, and you can also get that on Audible. To state the obvious, the most dangerous creatures on Earth are us. If you're feeling suicidal, call a suicide hotline. I've lost 3 people close to me to suicide. People you don't think will commit suicide will commit suicide. It's a cognitive blind spot because we're like, well, John's always been alive. I've never known him as a suicide, but until the day they do it. If someone talks about suicide, it's very, very likely they'll do it, even though they don't seem like the type. I've learned that the hard way, twice. Confront the grim reality. People close to you and total strangers may injure, rape, or kill you. I've never doubted the lethality of our species, but some who have led more sheltered lives act oblivious to this all too obvious reality. Read Gavin de Becker's The Gift of Fear, and everybody, but very especially women, should take his free YouTube masterclass. As a survivor of many life or death violent situations, I can tell you that Gavin's research is accurate, and you're a fool if you don't learn from it. If you think there's such a thing as casual sex, you're wrong. Casual sex is the dumbest oxymoron of all time. Is sex casual on the microbiological plane? No. It can create a life and or end a life, give you an STD like AIDS, which, especially in the past, was usually a death sentence. Now it's treatable, but you never know when the next one might come along that might not be. As above, so below. It's also not casual on other essential planes of reality. You are merging your primal energy with another being, creating karma, and setting up intense dramas that range from loving and transcendent to shades of neurotic to toxic to homicidal. So while I'm on this, I'll just go on a quick off-the-cuff tangent on it. A couple of quick rules of thumb that I recommend to anybody about to embark on a romantic relationship. Number 1, if you don't know the person's shadow, you don't know the other person, because everybody has one. So if you don't know their shadow, that means you're in a state of idealization and are in no position to commit to the relationship. Also, the reason why so many romantic relationships don't last very long, I believe, is because they tend to become physical and have ultimate states of intimacy popularly known as sex, far too early in the developmental cycle of the relationship, creating an inherently unstable process. So be cautious. The people you hang out with are people you're trusting your life with. I mean, it should be obvious. If you're getting into a car with anybody, you're putting your life in their hands. So choose your companions with great care. You might think automotive fatalities are most likely at highway speeds. More often they happen at intersections when you have the right of way at low speeds and are struck from the left on the driver's side by a vehicle speeding through the intersection. Look left, right, and left again before you enter intersections. If you're on foot or a bike, know that intersections are high danger zones. And I got some of that from Dr. Peter Attia in his excellent book, Outlive. In any situation where people wear helmets, wear a helmet. If you bike, I'd recommend getting a Bontrager helmet with collapsible cells. Bike riding, which I do all the time, much more dangerous than people think. They think, oh, it's just bike riding, but it's actually as dangerous per mile, at least, as motorcycles, especially at night. You can be going at high speed, somebody opens a car door and you go flying out, and the physics of bike injuries is that you will usually land on your head. So if you think that stuff that happens to other people can't happen to you, you're a fool and may pay for that delusion with your life. So there's a guy who wrote a study about warfare psychology who said that all soldiers go through 3 stages. And the first stage is, and this is why we choose young men, besides their being more physically fit, to participate in wars, because they're the ones who feel immortal and will put up with the situation, at least at first. And so the first stage is, it can't happen to me. It always happens to the other guy. I'm too good looking, too loved, too popular, too physically fit, too big and buff, too skillful. Second phase, it can happen to me. I need to be really, really careful. Third phase, it will happen to me. I need to get the hell out of here before it does. So that's why, they try and use soldiers in the front line while they're still in phases 1 or 2, because the third is more problematical. And please don't create survival hazards for yourself and others by voting for egomaniacal fascists who charismatically channel your sense of grievance. That's exactly how we got Hitler, World War II, the Holocaust, and many other living hells. If your awareness of history is vague before the birth of TikTok, learn some damn history. Otherwise, you'll be dooming us into repeating its worst episodes. If you see the world in black and white terms, don't. You live in a gray-scaled matrix where there are perpetrators and victims on both sides of any large conflict. Avoid ideologies and getting your news from social media. Anyone telling you to wake up, especially in a political context, is almost certainly a dangerous sleepwalker trying to suck you into their nightmare. The statement "wake up" is always indicates somebody who's asleep, because they should be saying that to themselves, because none of us are fully awake. And it almost always indicates that their naive assumption that they're awake is wrong. People always talking about a shadowy they. So like Alex Gray was constantly telling people, wake up, sheeple. I remember him saying this in 2008. There's not going to be a 2008 election. They've got the FEMA camps and the Amero, all set up and so on. And everything he would tell people to wake up to would be a prediction that would never happen. People are always talking about a shadowy they, accepting the slight possibility that the world would be taken over by a dark, non-binary sorcerer at some point. Want you to join them in projecting the shadow they failed to integrate into the world. So I noticed this when I worked for environmental causes. We'd be sitting at the bar and they'd all be like, I can't believe they are destroying the environment, and they this and they that. And, I'd just look at them and be like, Aren't you the guy that just cheated on your girlfriend like an hour ago? Like, there's always why are you so sure you're wearing the white hat and that there's a they out there responsible for everything? Also, don't get your news from polarized big talkers. Get your news from a non-polarized big talker like me, I guess. Be shrewd and well informed about politics. If a very, very dark gray candidate is running against a light to medium gray candidate, in other words, the very highest grade of politician, don't signal your virtue by voting for a candidate you think is pure sparkling white but has no chance of winning. Vote for the light to medium gray candidate, and remember that you and I are also grayscaled creatures. Can't afford to be naively idealistic with politics. It's all about compromise. It's often about choosing the lesser of two evils. That can be a very big difference, and not trying to be too pure. Consider this an auspicious moment to evaluate all your life risks and reduce those that aren't worth the potential benefits. And remember, the goal is not survival. You will likely survive death. See, Leslie, I know that sounds like a ridiculous opposite of the definition of death statement, but this can be put on a rational and empirical evidential basis. For those who haven't done their homework on NDEs and things like that, see Leslie Kean's book, Surviving Death. A journalist, and she's a very good one, investigates evidence for an afterlife. And then there was also a Netflix series similarly named and also based on her work called Surviving Death. Also, Chapter 3 of this book, sorry I bumped the mic there, Chapter 3 is called Near-Death Experience and the Singularity Archetype. It's linked up down there. You can read the chapter and the whole book for free on the website. Second edition available free. You can get the physical book on Amazon. First edition. They're not that different. And so your goal is not to survive, but to work on your life mission during the unknown amount of time you have left. Also, I can't endorse the work of Lawrence Gonzalez on survival enough. Oh, here's his book. Deep Survival. Everyone should own a copy. It's one of the most valuable books ever written, period. Besides the priceless content, Lawrence also happens to be a master of prose writing. If you're an earthbound mortal, this book is required reading. It reveals essential reality principles and can save your life. Here's an example. Helping someone else is the best way to ensure your own survival. It takes you out of yourself. It helps you to rise above your fears. Now you're a rescuer, not a victim. And seeing how your leadership and skill buoy others up gives you more energy and focus to endure. I experienced this on climbing to the summit of Mount Rainier. Of course, I was in great shape, but I was busy helping others, and that allowed me to forget my own discomfort. But even though Mount Rainier is not that tall, it is the world's largest mountain volumetrically and has the highest rate of fatalities of any mountain in North America, including McKinley. So you never know who's going to get altitude sickness. You can't tell that just by physical fitness. And I did get that. And altitude sickness means cerebral edema. It means your brain is swelling. So you just like I've experienced with hypothermia, you lose judgment quickly. And then by far, most mountain climbing accidents happen on the way down, because when you're walking downhill, every step is like a controlled fall, and you're also more tired. And now I had altitude sickness and my extreme fear of heights, which more mountain climbers than the average have a high fear of heights, made a lot of things like walking across a crevasse on a shaky ladder, put out on top of it, with crampons on, way more scary and precarious. So you want to have your warrior and survival principles so ingrained that when you are in a non-ideal state, just like boxers need to be able to keep their shit together after they've been punched hard in the face and their brain isn't working so well. So that's why you need to ingrain these habits into you so that when you're under stress and in a non-ideal state of consciousness, you can still call these up, hopefully. So the warrior stance, that's a life philosophy. I have links to many documents I've written related to that at the end of this card. And then finally, these are, you're getting these, there are 3 ways of getting survival training that I can think of at the moment, at least. So one is like this card where you're hearing the principles, but it's very abstracted. The most powerful, of course, is to be in a survival situation, or one like a not quite survival, but difficult situation, like a wilderness experience that kind of simulates some of it. But another way is to read great survival stories, true or fictional. And so this is my ultimate survival manual. The characters in this book go through extreme survival situations and illustrate many of these principles by adapting brilliantly to impossible situations. And this book is also, everything I've created is free on my website. But if you want the physical book, or you want the Audible book, I think that's probably the best version, read by me, or the Kindle, you can get those on Amazon. So I hope that increases your chances of living as long as it is convenient for you to be alive. And I wish you the best of fortune on your journey from birth to death.